Shabbat Shalom. So my daughter Amelia is in Israel, in Tel Aviv, for an internship. And on Wednesday afternoon, I texted her and I said, keep your phone charged and keep track of where your stuff is. And I don't know, I just sort of sensed something was coming. And on Thursday night, the Israeli military launched an overwhelming show of force against Iran. They began dismantling Iran's capability to launch ballistic missiles and starting to take out Iran's capability to produce nuclear weapons. And only a few of those attacks were in inhabited areas. In particular, there's an apartment complex in Tehran reserved for members of the elite Iranian Revolutionary Guard, and they took out some key nuclear scientists. Now, these attacks were so precise, you can actually see in this one case, there's like a hole in the side of the building where they just took out this one guy's bedroom. Like his roommates were like, now he's never gonna do the dishes. This attack took place mostly from the air. There are forces on the ground. They actually built a drone factory somewhere in Iran. And then a few hours later, Iran's response began, which was much less discriminating. There was a drone attack that ended with a whimper, and then further waves of ballistic missiles, mainly not against military targets, but against Israel's population centers. They were intended, if they have gotten through, there would have been tens of thousands dead. As it was, about 11 made it through. There were 3 deaths and some injuries, and we are praying for their recovery. And a lot of people are being treated for anxiety. A lot of them were being treated for anxiety before the attack. I just need to be clear about that. So what do we say in this moment? What do we have to talk about when our brothers, our sisters, our children, our friends in Israel are waiting for the sound of the next air raid sirens? And I want to apologize to the 3 of you who were also here last night. I commend you for your piety. You're going to hear some of the same things that I said last night again, because I only have so many smart things to say at any one time. Our Torah portion this week, so there are our friends, our relatives are waiting for the sound of the next air raid siren. And it turns out that our Torah portion this week speaks about the nature of a sound that is meant to rouse people at times of drama, at times of turning point. God speaks to Moses saying, "Aseh lachas shtei chatzrotzrot," make 2 silver trumpets, hammered work, that are to be used to summon the people. And when there are 2 of them blown together in a long blast, the whole company assembles at the tent of meeting. All of the army must appear. If only one is sounded, then only the chieftains, only the heads of Israel's units should appear. If there are short blasts, that means that the people are to move, are to journey. However, when you're at war against an aggressor who attacks you, then you sound truot, short blasts, that you may remember before God. And then one last institution is offered one last time. On joyous occasions, fixed festivals, new moon days, times of new beginnings, you sound the trumpets over your offerings and your sacrifices of well-being. So these are the different times. So the same instrument is used to create different sounds in different combinations that have different messages. And so this is not actually news. If you've ever watched a Ken Burns documentary that isn't about baseball, right, all the Civil War ones and the sepia-toned photos and the reading the letter, right? But in most wars, right, they did not have other forms of communications, and so drums or bugles were used to signal the troops, advance, retreat, march, attack. And for us, though, the idea of one instrument making so many sounds and have so many different meanings has resonance for us today in this moment at this time of war. And so I want to take a moment and look at these different sounds of the shofar, not the shofar, the trumpet, the chatzotzrot, and explain what they mean and what those sounds have to tell us at this point in history. So the first is that there are two long blasts when you are called upon to go to war. There are times when you have to go on the offensive, to preempt. And that is actually what this moment is. It is actually sort of a unique moment. Iran was getting ever closer to developing all the pieces and parts that it needed to develop nuclear weapons. And last night, one of my least favorite things to do is to fight on Facebook. I posted something and someone like, how do you know? That's just Bibi. And I'm like, Al Jazeera said it also. If Bibi and Al Jazeera agree, you can be pretty confident. And Iran was just possibly weeks away from having that capability and was participating in negotiations to stall. On the other hand, Israel has been afraid of this moment for decades, and certainly in the last few years. But it's really only in the last few months that they have gotten to the point where they have the capabilities they have had to respond in the way that they did. There was a moment where the curves of necessity and capacity crossed, and we were at that moment. If Israel had gone sooner, they might not have succeeded. If they had waited longer, the unthinkable would have happened, because the missiles landing in Tel Aviv would have had not just an explosive payload, but a far worse one. Sometimes the chatzotzrot, the trumpets, call out with a single blast to call only the princes. There are parts of this that went on in secret behind closed doors. There was a tremendous amount of deception that went into this week's success. So many things. So, for example, everyone in Israel knew that it was Prime Minister Netanyahu's son's wedding early next week, and everyone assumed that the attack would not be launched after the wedding. What they did not realize was that Sarah Netanyahu was not fond of the bride. And so they may not be getting, and the plans were already in place, the perimeter was put up, the hors d'oeuvres were cooking, and they are not getting their deposit back, but that's the least of their concerns. Israeli ministers had been scheduled to go hither and thither and yon for various meetings. And more so, President Trump was on record saying that he did not approve. Now, to be fair, just because he says something one day doesn't mean that he actually meant it. But there were really very organized reports from Israel, from America, that there would be no discussions about the talk until Sunday's meetings. And so, there is a lot of conversation going on in our country. I will save those conversations for another time. At this moment, I am grateful that our government chose to support Israel by allowing this to go forward and not spoiling the surprise. The portion continues. We're talking about the chatzotzrot. There is, however, after listing the sounds that you make because you've planned, there is the unplanned sound. Ki tavo milchama ba'artzechem. When the war comes to you, you blow this broken short blast. And that's the moment that we are in. In the best case, another few days. The worst case, this could be an ongoing struggle. And let me offer kind of a side note at this moment. The situation in Israel, from what I have heard, is that this is one of those moments when Israelis are scared but unified. They know, right? We know that Iron Dome and the other systems are not perfect. The last few times Iran, when Hezbollah launched missiles last time, they took out several cows. The last time that Iran attacked before this, they managed to take out like managed to kill some Palestinians in the West Bank. This time, the attack was much more focused and much more deadly. And so, a side note, also in our Torah portion this week, Aaron and Miriam complain against Moses and they are punished. Miriam is afflicted with leprosy, and Aaron is punished with, it would seem, nothing. And so Miriam is afflicted, is outside of the camp, and Aaron seems to get off scot-free, which is sometimes how things go in families. May you have that one sibling who gets away with everything. But in this case, the sages explain that sometimes even worse than going through something yourself is having someone you love, someone you care about in danger and suffering and not being able to do anything about it. So Aaron is the priest, and if you've read Leviticus, you know that there are 5-6 chapters of Leviticus, nothing but leprosy, and Aaron, the priest, is supposed to be the expert in that, right? If you have ghosts, you call Ghostbusters. If you have leprosy, you call Aaron. And in this moment, he is powerless to do anything. And so, speaking as a parent and having spoken to others in our congregation who have children in Israel right now, I can relate to that feeling. So, Wendy and I are helicopter parents, so Amelia's flight to Israel was canceled because of the last round of shenanigans, and so, we're on the phone, she's in the air, we're like rebooking, we're getting her there, we're walking her through the Berlin airport, from afar, and, there's a lot of problems that you can solve if your credit card is the right color, and this is not one of them. So I have friends who are calling governors, we're talking to people who have private planes, but there are times when no matter who you are, you can't do anything. And it is scary knowing that your children are not safe, but I want to point out that none of us are necessarily safe walking the streets of Washington, D.C. or Boulder, Colorado. And it's not so safe walking down a lot of streets in a lot of cities in the world or on a lot of college campuses either. So there's a final kind of blast, which is the joyful blast, the tkiah, the long and lasting blast of fixed festivals and new moon days. And so I don't want to jinx myself, but I think it is fair to say that the short term will be very difficult, but in the long term that this is actually a turning point in history. That in some ways this is the closing bracket to October 7th. So earlier one of our kids asked me, in the Torah portion, you may have seen there were 2 upside down nuns in our Torah portion, 2 weird notational marks. And the answer, those are quotations. Those set off one passage from the rest of the portion, the rest of the Torah, where we sing, Kuma Adonai v'yafutzu oivecha, arise God and scatter your enemies. And so in some sense, we are living between 2 brackets. October 7th was the start of some of the darkest times in our history, certainly in the last 80 years. And this is not the end, but maybe it's the beginning of the end, or at least it is the end of the beginning. We know that there are Israelis who are suffering, who have been killed. We also know that had this not gone down as it did, the numbers would eventually have been far greater. And despite our feelings of powerlessness, we are in danger, but we are not caught unawares. We have the ability to defend and protect ourselves. And so it is tough to watch the news, but we understand that if we escape with our lives and with our country intact, it is a sign of greater power in this world. I also want to point out that this Israel gives every campaign that it has, every war gets a name, it's Iron Skies, it's Steal This, right? And so they chose a very particular name for this moment of rising lion. And look, usually, like, lion's a big symbol in Judaism. In the Torah, there's a bunch of different words for lions because they're a symbol of strength in ancient times. But the lion is not just a Jewish symbol. So until 1979, the flag of Iran had a lion on it, and a lion ramp, like, kind of looking like this, like, yeah, lions, right? Detroit, I don't know. And when the Islamic radicals took over and began destroying that country, they took the lion off their flag. And so when the Israelis talk about a rising lion, that is not just a symbol of Judah compared to a rising lion, but actually, by the way, the Iranian or the Persian people perhaps reclaiming their own legacy. Until 1979, Iran was a cosmopolitan, advanced country, was a country that was devoted to the well-being of its citizens, was part of the world. And perhaps there is a chance that that might someday return. And perhaps this is the beginning of a turning point for the people of Iran, who deserve better than what they have gotten for the last 45 years. You know, a few thousand years ago, Jews overcame and overthrew a genocidal regime in Persia. And ever since then, we've had to eat these triangular cookies with poppy seeds in them. So when we talk about the Chatzotzrot being sounded at times of celebration, I actually believe that this is one moment in history that may actually be remembered. That when we look back, our descendants look back 100 years from now, they will be glad that this moment happened, and they will be celebrating, hopefully with better snacks. My colleague Jacob Blumenthal pointed out, and I wrote about this to the congregation the other day, that our Haftorah that we read today includes the verses, Lo b'chaya, lo b'koach, ki im beruchi, not with strength, not with power, but rather with my spirit. And so this is a time when power is called for. This is a time where strength is called for, but not just strength of military, strength of planes and technology, but even more so strength of spirit, of courage, of patience, of advocacy. We are living in a complicated time here in the United States where many things that do not go together are being confused. And as important as the debates that are going on in this country are on so many different topics, to the extent that this is being mixed into them is a sign of how important the fight ahead of us is. The fight for people to understand the spirit of what is happening, of understanding the existential threat to Jews, not just in Israel, but in everywhere, which is currently being fought. And so I would encourage each of us to engage in prayer, to engage in patience, to be prepared to tell the story to friends and neighbors, to understand why it is that people thousands of miles away, one side shooting at missile silos, the other side shooting at cities, and explain why we are at this moment. The Chatzotzrot, those trumpets had the capability of making so many different kinds of sounds for different moments. This is a time when we raise up our own trumpets, where we make sure that people know what we are calling for and why. Shabbat Shalom.